Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome, everyone, to the next Politics in a Pint, brought to you by the Eugene J. McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement. Today, we are very, very happy to welcome back a distinguished alum, Mr. Chase Cushman, class of '06. Let's give him a round of applause for coming back. We're so excited to hear his just insights about working in the White House, and he will be interviewed by our distinguished chair of the political science, Professor Claire Haig.
Hey,
now,
thank you.
Throughout the event, if you...
Thanks, John.
She deserves it too. Yes, she does.
Yeah, sure.
Throughout the event, if you have any questions you have for Chase, just feel free to write them down on some of the scraps of paper we've left out. If you need more scraps of paper, just give me a little wave. I'll come running. Or one of the other staff will come running. We'll collect the questions. We'll give it up to Claire. So, without further ado, Professor Claire Haig.
Thanks, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I'm going to be evil and ask Chase, this is the fourth time he's answered this question. So he's now had the opportunity to edit this finally, and you should have embellished it appropriately. But I'd like to get his response of how did you get from St. John's to the White House?
I'm going to project you. So how did I get to the White House from St. John's? It's a good question, actually. It was not my intent to be a political science major when I came here. I was a history, I thought, major, and actually, ironically, I was really taking history classes.
Use the mic. Use this mic. There you go.
Okay. And so I came here, and my advisor happened to be Kay Wellsborn and Gary Prevost. And they said, why don't you take a political science class? I said, okay. And I took it, and I just fell in love with it. And Kay then encouraged me to do the DC internship. I was kind of apolitical. She said, you might enjoy being out there, just see what the city is like, get a feel for what electoral politics are like. So I said, okay. And I did the DC internship and fell in love with it. I worked as an intern at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and ended up enjoying elections, and thought then that my plan was I was going to work in campaigns. Came back senior year here in 2006, and my internship in DC connected me with the state party here. It was an election year, and I actually ended up being an intern here for Richard Carlbaum in '06. He is an alum and was mayor of St. Joe. I was heavily involved in the Democratic Party. Did research tracking as my internship my senior year, which basically meant I would go to the Republican caucuses at conventions and record their candidates. Once we had a candidate who we were running against, was Michelle Bachmann, and we had a Democratic candidate, Patty Wetterly, and I started on her congressional race as her body person and scheduler. And we lost, so I moved back in with my parents into Monticello, Minnesota, and kind of tried to think about where we're going to go from here. And my goal at the time was to work on the Hill. I wanted to be a congressional staffer, and I thought that was where I wanted to be. I started doing, it seemed like we had new Democratic control of Congress at the time. It was the '06 wave election, and I must have done 40 interviews on the Hill. I had a buddy who did fundraising for us. He was from then the HRC, Human Rights Campaign. His name was Jamie Citron, and he said, come join me in Chicago. He's from Chicago. He said, well, you're not doing anything, just come to Chicago. And I just recently was hired for this guy named Barack Obama. Maybe you should just come in and volunteer and see if you like that. And so in between job interviews, I started volunteering. This is February 2007. And got, a few weeks later, offered a job by the Obama people. At the same time, I got a Hill job I wanted. And it was one of those moments where I thought, I could pursue the plan that I had when I set out on this thing, which was to work on the Hill, or I could see what a presidential race is like. And again, I heard Kay Wellsborn on the back of my head who said, if you have an opportunity to work on a presidential campaign, you should do it, and do it now and not wait. So I did it, and I called that Hill staff back, and I consulted these guys and said, I don't know what I should do. And I ended up, I'm going to try this Obama thing. And I called the Hill office back, and I would distinctly remember having a conversation with their chief of staff saying, I'm going to thank you for the scheduling job offer. I'm going to work on the Obama campaign. And they said, are you sure you want to do that? This thing's going to be over soon, and it's going to be that much harder, once Hillary's our candidate, for you to find a job. And that kind of got my competitive juices flowing. I thought, no, yes, now I really do want to do this. I started out, actually, ironically, and I haven't told this part of the story, is the job they hired me to do was human resources. I signed people up. We were staffing up really quickly at the time. And so I did payroll and got people on our insurance plan, which I know nothing about. And my boss was a very lovely woman. Her name was Jen Clark, but it was not my thing. Well, the scheduling advance director at the time, her name was Alyssa Mastrobonico. Her roommate was Juliana Smoot, who was our fundraiser. And again, credit to Jamie Cintron and Juliana. They said, there's this great kid, kind of comes from an advanced background. You guys should hire him in the scheduling advance department. So I changed my job on the campaign, like March, and started doing advance. Did advance in 2008. Wanted to get more of a desk job, so switched over to scheduling. Did the president's daily schedule. There's 3 of us for the first term. And through longevity and being there as people left, I slowly climbed the ladder. And next thing I know, I ran the scheduling advance department at the end. So, it kind of took a strange route, but through a bunch of 50% taking opportunity when it came and being in the right place at the right time, and here we are. So.
We're going to have to switch back and forth with these things. All right, so, by the way, please ask questions. I've been asking Chase questions all day, so I may skip questions that you think are interesting. So I encourage you to write any questions that you have on those cards and hand it to either Maddie or Peter over there. So my question is, you've been an observer of politics now, presumably, since you're a political science major, so sort of 10 to 15 years. How do you think things have changed, and including, what you learned in political science classes and what you see happening now? And I would preface that by saying, I think things have changed too. I do not teach Congress in the same way as I taught it that first time when Chase was in my class, the first time I ever taught Congress. So, so how have things changed over the past decade and a bit?
So let's unpack the question, I guess, a little bit. I think it changed in our run. When I started, even just in the technology, we had BlackBerry, and that was brand new, I thought. And we didn't get iPhones until like our last year at the White House. So social media and the rise of it literally happened while we were running. And I think even for my own personal consumption, I feel like, Twitter wasn't a thing, and trying to figure out how to approach news and what you did, even when it came to events, changed while we were there. As far as like how you tailor things to be seen and to get out, it's no longer enough to just have get your stuff on CNN. You have to worry about kind of how the social media interaction plays with it, and as far as doing things that not necessarily with traditional media all the time. And that happened while we were there, which was interesting. I think what it has done, though, is kind of a sorting of people. There is no baseline of what is agreed upon as the main narrative anymore. It used to be there was. What was on the 6 o'clock news is what, as an advanced person, you built towards getting the picture up for. And now no longer is that the case. That is not necessarily your audience all the time. But what it also has done is trying to figure out how to get eyeballs on what we did, too. And so, to kind of, as a roundabout way to answer your question, the things that have changed is not necessarily how we produce ourselves or what we did. It's more about who is consuming it and how do we find the people we want to consume what we're doing. And that has changed because now people can kind of sort into where they want to go. Think about it. If you're a Democrat, you're probably checking HuffPo. And your Twitter feed is probably loaded with the same news story said, 10 different ways. And you're probably not exposing yourself, unfortunately, I think is happening now, to not necessarily counter opinion, but even just to news as story, and if it doesn't agree with what you think or perceive it should be, you can go and find the source that does. And that didn't happen when we first started running. That was starting to happen then. So what we struggle with is trying to figure out how do we get to our target audience, which is you guys. What do we need, where do we need to be, and what do we need to talk to get his message there. So.
If anyone wants to flag me down with a card, just wave. So beware that. Oh, there are people. It's all good. I have one more of my own, so I'm going to keep those. So within your career at the White House, what do you think is valuable about your St. John, St. Ben's education? And that can be anything, and it doesn't have to be political science classes. It could be anything. So what is it that you brought from St. John's that helped you in your career?
So that's a good question. I think twofold. I think political science, and I said this to the classrooms I saw today, I think what it helped me do was help me learn how to think. And not, that sounds maybe a cliche thing you're supposed to say about college perhaps. But what it helped me do is figure out what is the underlying thing we are debating now, and ask that deeper question of, it's really easy, especially working in that town, to get stuck in your tribal instincts of this is my team versus that team. And instead of asking, but what is this actually about? And that is what I learned as a political science major, that if you're gonna have an actual argument that is meaningful and worthwhile, and maybe it could change someone's mind, you have to operate off the same premise. Otherwise, you're just yelling at each other and no one's ever even convinced of anything. So unless you agree on the baseline of what it is we're talking about, you can't move forward. And I think you see that play out now in the healthcare debate. The Republican Party for the longest time knew they didn't like the ACA. And this is me putting my partisan hack hat on, so I apologize in advance. But they knew they didn't like the ACA. But they also, what happened was, within their own conference, they didn't agree about why. And what I mean by that is, there's a faction that thought there is a valid role of government in healthcare. It was just that they didn't agree on how it was being delivered by the plan we put forward. Another faction that doesn't think government should be involved in healthcare at all. And for 7 years, that debate was never actually really had. Instead, they just knew that they wanted to repeal it. And what we saw play out was they had that debate where there is a faction that, the Freedom Caucus folks decided there is no role of government in healthcare. So of course they're never going to agree with any plan that had that. And I think it's easy to get stuck working in that business in the back and forth and the points on the board and the daily matters. But this education helped me kind of ask those questions about what is actually the underlying thing here. As far as St. John's goes, it may sound like a thing that alums are supposed to say when they come back, but I think it bears true. And I think there's not any coincidence, and maybe he would agree, Dennis, that two of us ended up working when we did. And it's not necessarily because this is an excellent institution and we are geniuses, which this is an excellent institution, but I'm not a genius. What it did is it taught me that you don't do this by yourself. And I think that this place, even when you guys disagree in your classes, that you're not alone. And that nothing you do in your life, you're actually truly alone. And that there's a community there that's there to help you and pull you along. And there's that sense of public spiritedness, regardless of how I may feel philosophically about one thing or the other, that I think this place has that I've not necessarily seen elsewhere I've been. And that may sound like the thing that they put in the brochures, but I think it bears out, and it's true. There's something about people that go here and why they come here is because they're looking for that.
Okay. This is sort of a slightly edited question, but all right. And this can be partisan hat, as you put it, or it can be just political insider hat. So if you compare the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and the Trump administration, what do you think the biggest strengths and weaknesses are? And if you don't have very much insight on Bush, I appreciate that, but what do you think were the Obama's personal strengths and maybe the administration's strengths, and what do you think the Trump's strengths and weaknesses are?
I think my only interaction with the previous administration was our transition in, and they were very helpful in kind of ingrained in you, especially for a kid that came out of a partisan mindset out of college, that in this country we have elections and elections matter. And at the end of the day, our team won and their team lost, and they were going to do everything they could to help us, though, make that transition. And they, say what you want about their policies. They believed in what they were doing, and they embodied kind of that West Wing, the show spirit of don't underestimate the patriotism of the other side. Just because you disagree with their opinion doesn't mean that they're wrong. And they did that well. I think for us, and this is probably, obviously I have a certain opinion about it because I worked there for so long. What we were good at, and what the president was good at, is considering decisions and having the right temperament and having that duck back of, people are going to throw a lot of things at you, but you got to let them beat off your back, and that it doesn't help anybody to get hot in a situation, and when you're president of the United States, you need to carry yourself in such a way because you're not just, leader of the Democratic Party. You're also the commander-in-chief. You're not just the commander-in-chief. You're essentially the most important, consequential leader in the world, and so you should carry yourself that way. And I think that we did. Sometimes we got in some trouble because we deliberated too many times. You hear that as being the criticism, but I think that his temperament kind of spoke down towards all of us. We all kind of took on that. You do your job, you do it well, and you don't let yourself get rattled. I think the next administration, what they have done that is I think, remarkable, that I will say is their strength, is they've upended the script, whereas they have done the one thing that I think that all political people like me in campaigns have always wanted to do, which is what if we ignore the story? What if we let them write bad things about us? Does that matter? Do we need to respond to every press criticism? And it turns out you don't. Not when you're, at least so far what we've seen, that instead of getting wrapped around their axle about bad press, what if we just ignore the bad press? And that's what they're doing, and I think they actually have they've done like the experiment that people that work in campaigns have always wanted to do, which is what if we don't reply? And what if we carry on with our version of the narrative? I think what they could do better, that destroying process for the sake of destruction, I don't think is necessarily helpful. I think there's a reason why the government is career and political, that functions that it does matter, and that filling positions is important, and that how things are done, even if it's been done that way forever, and that's not necessarily always the best answer, there's a reason for that sometimes. And so that is the one thing I think that they haven't had instilled in them yet, from my partisan perspective, regardless of how I feel about their policy.
Okay, so to go back to your sort of earlier career and make this comparison, what was the difference between working on a campaign in the 6th District for Patty Wetterling's campaign and versus working for a presidential one, other than the fact that working on the presidential ones you won, and working on the 6th District one, you didn't?
I mean, the CD6 race was actually one of my favorite jobs I've had in politics. And the reason is, if you get a chance to work in a congressional race, you should, because your staff is small. There's maybe like 8 or 9 people. You'll get actual time with the candidate. You'll get to know them. You'll actually feel like you're out there meeting voters, if that's something you like to do. And you'll learn, basically everyone's kind of got to be able to do everything. So you'll learn a lot really fast. And that's the difference. The presidential campaign is big enough where the staff is specialized. People that do fundraising, people that work on policy do policy. They have an actual advance team where we didn't. So, that in itself is also interesting to see that machinery, because then it allows you to kind of zero in on a specific field. So if you get the chance, I would try to work on both. I would argue to do what I did first, work on the smaller campaign first, do the big one, and then if you like campaigning, go back to the small ones, because then you can rise up and maybe run your own race. It doesn't take that long to learn, and you guys are in a good position to do that. So.
Right. How do those who work in the White House perceive and respond to the increasing partisanship and polarization in the political parties? And I presume that means both sort of electorally and in Congress?
That's a good question. I think part of it too, we were insulated, and we think that, it was always good coming home because you think the things that you think working there, that, this partisan gridlock is terrible and half the country hates the other half. You learn when you go home that at the end of the day, it's people aren't talking about the same things that you're talking about at work. So I think our perspective changed in that the longer that we stayed there, I think the easier trap it fell into, insulating yourself. And so it took like us running for re-election again or midterms to get us back out there and realize that if we want to fight partisanship, we also need to be part of the debate. And I think we did early on a poor job of that. And I think that the Trump administration is learning that too, we did kind of a similar thing with our healthcare plans. We tried to let Congress kind of steer it, and so did they. And when they should have, in my opinion, taken ownership of that of their own from the beginning, and it might have had a different result. So.
All right. I think this is maybe a different sort of partisanship. Why should somebody work on the White House over the Hill? And so what's the difference, do you think, between working in the White House and the Hill? And I guess as somebody who studies both institutions, which one's better, I guess is how you...
Well, unfortunately, I never worked in the Hill, so I can't answer that. I would say the White House is better, obviously. But I think it really depends on what it is you're trying to do. I think what is unique about the White House is you'll never have a job again where you'll be able to feel like you're influencing and be able to carry the ball down the field to do the most good for the most amount of people. I mean, it's the White House. You're the tip of the largest employer in the world, the federal government. And you were single-handedly able to be in a position to do the most for the most people. But at Hill office, you have the most closest contact with constituents. So if that is the thing that drives you, then I would suggest you start there first. And at the end of the day, Congress is still the most important institution. They have the most words in the Constitution written about them because that is they're the ones that write the laws. So, and I think they've forgotten that at times. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that are supposed to be more important than us. I think the advantage of working at the White House, and that's where the advantage is, but the thing we struggle with is the president has to take a position on most everything, whereas Congress doesn't necessarily. Even our omission of taking a stance is a stance. And so if you want to have that feeling of being in the spotlight, then the White House is probably more for you. But I don't know if I answered the question appropriately, but that's what I'll say about that.
All right, this is not intended to be any sort of gotcha question, so you can bow out of this one however you want. What do you think the administration's biggest regret is?
I don't want to speak for the president or Dennis. I think my own... I think if we had well, obviously it would be nice if the website had worked, especially at a time when they had shut the government down and they had given us the field and then we totally fumbled the ball. So I think, looking back on it, for me, just working in that building, that is probably the biggest regret that I have just as a collective body. But I think personally, the only real regrets I have is not trusting the people that you work with enough. And you learn that, I think, just through trial and error, and learning that you're not doing it by yourself, and that it's okay to say that you need help. And that is a hard lesson, especially for people that work in government and politics, to admit that you need help doing something. And once you learn to do that, you actually get a lot better at your job. And so when I first took over the department, I struggled with that. And I thought that I needed to do everything at all times. And it took my boss, the deputy chief of staff, Anita, to say to me, and my guys to say to me, you understand that what you think we will support. and that we are here to help you, and that you will make a mistake, but then you carry on from that instead of dwelling on it. So, I think the only regrets I have is not learning that lesson fast enough.
All right. So this is a softball question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's the funniest moment you had in the White House that you can tell us about?
I'm going to go back further. I'm going to say it's not, most days were filled with, if you step back, like you always are asking yourself, what am I doing right now? I think the funniest thing that happened to me, which wasn't very funny at the time, was my very first interaction with him, my very first advance trip. I just got hired in the advance department. They wanted to send me on the road to kind of figure out, to learn what it is we did, because I have no idea. And the first site, we were in New Hampshire. I got in charge of just setting up a meeting. I think it was with SCIU. That all you had to do was come in and sit down and be part of a meeting. That was my job. Was to figure. I had a week to figure that out. Right? I can do this. And the first time I met him, he gets out of the car. He gets out. He asks me, "What are we doing?" And I opened the door and I flat tired the president, and we both fell on the floor into the meeting. And I thought, that's it. That's one job, and I can't even do it. And but they didn't get rid of me. And later on, his memory is so crazy. I was just a junior staffer, but I remember we were going over the schedule, and he said, "Yeah, remember when he tripped me in New Hampshire?" I haven't said anything about it for this entire time, but I remember that, and I was like, "What?" And it just came out of nowhere that he pulled that memory. So, yeah.
That's good. I like it. And again, I apologize because I've been basically asking you questions all day, so I've heard more of this narrative, but somebody's asked, and you really should, what does it mean to be Director of Scheduling in Advance? As in, what did you do all day?
That's a good question. So we're kind of two departments that work on similar things. So there's the Advanced Department and the Scheduling Department. And I was kind of the linkage between the two of them. And what does that mean? So Advance are the folks that if we're going to, if you were to come here to St. John's, we would send people 7 days out ahead of time to figure out how we get him in and out of St. John's and the least impact on you guys, and that achieves the mission that we're looking for, and achieves the mission of Secret Service to keep him safe. And so that's what Advance does. So when he travels somewhere, we send a team, and they kind of figure out nuts to bolts how we get the president in and out in a way that works for everybody. All the way down to what does the picture look like behind him. So they would be the ones that worked on putting the step and repeat in the appropriate place for the camera position that we had. So they're kind of like the roadies, and the executors of the ideas. The scheduling department, our job is not to find things for him to do. There's plenty of things that the president should be doing. Our job is to kind of serve two roles, which is to, one, make sure that all aspects of the White House are talking to each other, because people that have the president's time, that is the most important thing that they have, but it's not all the things that he's doing. So the National Security Council will be really interested in their phone calls and the meetings they have with them, but they don't. Their job is not to pay attention to when he's going to do ledge calls or when he's got to go out and give a statement somewhere. So my job was to make sure the people that were interested in those things were actually talking to each other. And then two is to kind of prioritize. If we do X, we can't do Y. And we'd sit down with Dennis on Mondays, have a scheduling meeting. I'd go through all the requests for his time that I thought we needed to raise with the group, and I'd have to go through this is what it means to do this. So my job was really more to kind of prioritize our decision-making flow for how to use the president's time effectively as the scheduling side of me. And then for Advance, it was basically to help kind of execute once there was a scheduling decision where we wanted to go and what to do, figuring out how do we get there. So my job really as the unifier of both those departments is to take the meetings so that my teams could do their jobs. So.
All right. Okay. To what extent, you talked a little bit about sort of expectations and media expectations and a media bubble. Is there at any point that you thought, in terms of not just what President Obama did, but also just what the administration was doing, that you thought that the media narrative was just completely wrong and that you couldn't seem to overcome that media narrative?
I think for me, because I was invested in the scheduling of his time, it was early on with the ACA and the narrative that we were ramming this bills down everyone's throat and that it came out of right field and no one knew anything about it. When the reality was that we scheduled so much time for him to meet with members. And the other criticism was that it wasn't bipartisan, it was a single Republican vote, which is true. But it wasn't for lack of meeting with them or calling them or doing a bipartisan summit at the Blair House that we did to talk about healthcare. And we did it for a year. We did 2 joint sessions of Congress where we spoke about it. We went on the road and gave speeches, and yet that never broke through. And instead what broke through is that it was too big of a bill happening too fast. And you know, sure, for a bill that size, we were moving as fast as we could, but it still took over a year to do it. And it shouldn't have been a surprise because of what we campaigned on. And so it's frustrating to me to see the amount of time and work that I put into putting events together or getting time on a schedule for him to do these things and having that not, mean anything. Because at the end of the day, if it's not seen, it's not heard, and that's not the narrative that's out there. So
to follow up on that, do you blame the media? So to follow up on that, do you blame the media for not having a narrative that allowed people to understand what was happening? Or do you think that the partisanship in Congress, that polarization, is to blame for not getting a bipartisan bill so that Republicans were able to say, no one on our side voted for this, it must be a terrible bill?
I mean, I think that I'll blame our own idealism more than anything. I think that in hindsight, we should have taken our case public first instead of trying to, do all these meetings over the course of that summer that weren't public. We should have been out there talking to the voters before other people could. What happened was we weren't. The first summer we were there, we did all kinds of meetings at the White House, and then they went back on their August recess, and you guys know the famous town halls that went down, and then next thing you know, ACA is a terrible idea. And I think, maybe it wouldn't have mattered, but we should have framed the debate first, and we didn't really do a good job of that. And I think that's part of that is a function of thinking that, just because you're elected, there's also, Congress still has a voice in it, and they're still also looking towards their elections, and that you're not going to change the debate overnight as far as partisanship goes. So I think our own kind of naivete or idealism kind of got the better of us and really whined really hard to find those votes when we should have realized that as soon as they declared that they weren't going to let that go and to frame the debate ourselves, and we didn't.
I don't know which order to wind these on. All right, so to return to this sort of notion that the sort of partisanship and the polarization in the political system within DC, so within Congress, do you think that there's any possibility of a conversation beginning between Democrats and Republicans on the Hill, particularly in the House, Democrats and President Trump and his administration? Is there any way that you can see on the Republican side the most productive members of the Republican conference in the House and Senate? Who do you admire most within that side who you think you could make a change and to get things done in a bipartisan manner? Or if you think there's no hope, I guess that's a really much shorter answer, but try that one.
Okay, I'll try to unpack this a little bit. I think No, I think it depends on the midterms, and when they start, it depends on when they really ramp up for that. And I think there is an opportunity for some bipartisanship if it turns out the Trump administration is really going to need Democratic votes to do some things, i.e., infrastructure, and how his numbers are doing with his own, electorate as far as Republicans, and how much of a actual position he is, one, to either kind of threaten his own caucus with things he could do in their campaign cycles, or even just how unpopular it is for a general election. So I think there's opportunity there, but it is born out of the upcoming election cycle and really kind of where his standing is in. I think as far as just partisanship in general, and this is just me being a former political science student here, there's a structural problem as far as how our elections go. And that is, think about it. You guys are, most of you probably political science people, you know that every 2 years the House is up for election. But how many of those races do you actually hear about? I worked at the DCCC. There'd be maybe 10 or 11 frontline races. Think about that. 10 or 11 races that we thought could be flipped. The rest of the seats weren't going to be. And I think that, even the education that I got that needs to catch up a little bit is we would talk about the power of incumbency and how that is the reason why we don't have competitive elections in this country. Because we don't. I mean, if you're telling me that 435 people are up for election every 2 years, and only 10 to 12 of them are competitive, but they're all up. I mean, that's crazy. These are the margins we're talking about. The Democrats flip like 20 seats and they control Congress, but that's crazy out of a body that's that big. And we gotta start thinking about it's not necessarily the power of incumbency anymore, because we've gotten really good at data. That's what the rise has been, and we were guilty of it too. Is we know where you guys are as voters, and it's gotten down to the point where we draw our district lines when we redistrict to concentrate the other side's votes into certain districts and maximize our leverage in voting in other districts. And the Republicans did a better job of realizing earlier on, if we targeted state house races and governorships in the early 2000s, then we can kind of control the redistricting map going forward. Everyone talks about this Democratic demographic bubble that's coming, which is true. The public there's more millennials now than baby boomers, and there's more minorities than white people coming into the country. But they're coming in certain places. The cities are growing, and until you redistrict and redraw those maps, the advantage is always going to favor Republicans for a while in the House. And I think we need to have a larger question about, and this is something you guys should talk about at schools, because that's going to be a really hard thing to overcome. And the other thing that's interesting, I'm working in this business, is federal elections are regulated by states. So there's 50 different ways to draw these congressional, because of thanks to federalism, states get to determine these things. And so it's going to take a bigger movement, that any one person could conceive, and it's going to be so bifurcated and diverse that it's near impossible, I think, to actually overcome the partisan schism we have, and it's by our own making. And the other then, and so part of it is structural, and I would argue, in my humble, I have an undergrad degree in political science, that is single-handedly the biggest thing affecting partisanship in Washington. Now, the things on the periphery, and I'll wrap up so we can ask more questions, is you combine that or couple that with the way we're consuming our news, and people are more capable. Yes, the internet's a great thing, and I believe in it. I'm a millennial, but it allows us to sort in our own camps even more. It is the great thing that allows us to communicate with everybody, but think about who you communicate with online. You think about your friends on Facebook. We all know that we roll our eyes at the Facebook feed from the guys doing a rant that we don't agree with, and then we click on the ones that we actually do. And that is getting more and more, we're sorting that way further and deeper, and that alone too then contributes to the echo chamber, where we don't even agree on any base facts anymore, because we just say, well, no, that isn't what I saw. I could find a Twitter link that agrees with what I say. And that is what it's allowed us to do, is even get in our camps even more. So it's a couple of things, but I would say structural problems is what's really driving partisanship. So.
All right, what was the hardest part of your job? And then sort of how available did you have to be while you were in the White House? And also, I think somebody said, what led to your initial distrust of the people you worked with? Although I think that's an over-reading of what you said, but you can clarify that too. Yeah.
It wasn't distrust. It was the hardest part of my job was learning to trust myself and to understand that I had a voice and an opinion, and that they hired me to voice that, and realizing that you were going to be wrong at some point, at some time. And that was okay. Your job was not to always be right all the time, because that's impossible. It wasn't a lack of trust in my colleagues, and I should have said, I knew I wasn't saying that the right way. It was feeling like everything, that I had, if I wanted something to be done, that I should do it. And learning that, it took a buddy of mine, Greg, to tell me that, I faced this when I went, when my daughter was born, that it is okay to be gone, and that the place is designed to function without you. Because think about it, if it didn't, that'd be crazy, and you have to carve that time out for yourself, otherwise you kind of lose sense of your own person. So that was, the lesson that I had to learn was, I don't really have much of an ego, but to not always feel like I had to be there doing it, and not having this guilt. I think a lot of us from Minnesota have this work guilt, that if we're not working, if we don't show up that day, then we have failed our ancestors and everybody. And it was learning that to not necessarily feel that. You're not letting anybody down, that life happens, and that there's lots of people there to catch you and help you. We're all on the same team. So.
What is it like to work personally with the president and Dennis? And the other separate but related question, is the Obama-Biden bromance real?
So I'll answer how it was like to work with Dennis first. Dennis is probably, I don't know how he did the job he did for as long as he did it, dealing with the stuff he did in a family. And that speaks to, but I'll also say, and kept a sense of himself. He is probably single-handedly the kindest person I've met, or one of them, and genuinely does care about you. And there's plenty of times that we would disagree, and there's plenty of times that I'd screw up, and he'd let me know. But he's also the first person that came down to your office after you had it out that would then apologize or say, hey, that wasn't personal, or he would send you a thank you note. And I think that for him to do what he did and still keep that sense of himself speaks to the kind of man he was and is. And I have nothing but a respect for him, and I work for him again if he asks me to. And the same for the president. I said to the other class, if you guys want to work in this business and you think that you want to get into electoral politics, it shouldn't just only be for somebody that you agree with on a philosophical or that they're part of your party. It should be someone that you genuinely like the character of, and that you think is a person that you can see yourself with. And if it's a presidential campaign, you're not going to get necessarily that access to them right away, but you can see who the kind of people they hire, and I find by and large it reflects the people that they are. And he is kind of as he seems. And this, take it for what you will, because I work for him, but he's genuine, he's kind, and just kind of even-keeled, even-tempered, that was reflected onward from the senior staff down. So to you, I would say, don't just work for somebody because you think that you agree with their policies. Make sure it's somebody that you kind of agree with who they are, because you're going to do a lot for them. You're going to see them and work for them and go places for them that you wouldn't necessarily do. You're going to see them more than you see your own family. So it should be someone that you respect and want to be there for. So.
Okay, this is kind of, you can reject the premise of this question too. What has the Obama White House done to improve race relations? Trump campaigned on how Democrats have failed blacks, and is this an accurate description of this issue?
I mean, I think it's It's partly that I think in this country we had this misguided notion that just because we elected a black president, that suddenly race is not a thing anymore. And I think, it may look like really the criticism is look at all these, these police things happening and look at the state of race relations now. But we're actually having a conversation about them now. And I think by and large we're allowed to, and this is maybe self-patting on my own back for what we did because I worked for him and he's my guy, but I think that electing him gave us license to finally talk about race with each other. Before that, we wouldn't. You would talk about it at your home. You wouldn't address what it means in professional life necessarily with people that weren't like you. And with him, we finally were able to have that debate publicly and in the open with each other. That America is a country that does have race problems, and that it exists, in all kinds of levels, not just overt racism, but just in the notion of privilege and where you're from and what your name is. And I think we finally are getting to the point where we're having those discussions publicly. And I don't think that we can credit claim and say it's because we did any good summit or he did an event, but I think we finally got the monkey off our back that we had a black president, and now we can move on and talk about these things. But to think that we were going to fix it, is putting a lot on him. That I don't think it's not a problem that any one man can fix. The problem's inside of us, and until we recognize that and start fixing ourselves, I don't think one president or one person is going to do that for us. But that's just what I think.
All right. I'm keeping an eye on the time, so okay. So one of the things that has been notable both about President Obama's second term and President Trump's first 72 days has been the discussion of executive orders. How do you think that changes or has changed the way that politics is functioning in DC and I guess in America?
Well, I think the executive orders are purely a result of, and this is me working for the executive, so my opinion is biased, but if Congress were to write a law, they could overrule any executive order they wanted. And it's their lack of action because of their fear of position taking sometimes that in that vacuum, people have come to rely on the president in doing something. And I think for President Trump, he realized if he wanted to do some of the things he said he was going to do in the campaign, the most expeditious way to do that is to write it on a piece of paper and call it an EO. Now, I think the things that after working there, they're doing that I think that is some unforced errors on their part is they're not paying enough attention to the process of writing one. You can't just, when we would debate them, and not that I was personally part of it, but I was only there because I knew about what time we wanted to use them for, that there would be consideration of what can we do legally, what is the likelihood this will get challenged, what do the agencies have to say, what are the rules that could stem from this. And it seems like, and that takes a long time. So to do it within a week, there's a reason why some of these things aren't happening. That the process in getting there does matter and is important, and it's kind of being disregarded, I think, at sometimes. And I think they could do themselves a more service if they actually kind of put through an agency review process or write it more than a page long, that they'd actually maybe do some of the policies they're saying about. Now, how do I feel about EOs? I think that people like to malign the presidency for taking this imperial power, but I think that if Congress were to exercise their constitutional power, there wouldn't be this clamoring for executive orders. What does the American public like to do? They like their services from government, but they don't like paying for them in taxes. The same is true, I think, for action out of government. People don't like it when the presidency oversteps its bounds, but they want the president to do something all the time. So we're constantly working that building for 8 years. You're constantly fighting against this expectation to do something, but at the same time, people don't want you to be a king. So it's kind of like you want the same thing that's warring against itself all the time. But if Congress were to pass laws, we wouldn't need EOs. So.
That was a very good political science answer. All right. So what's next for you now? You've left the administration at, January 20th. Are you, I guess the question is another presidential campaign a possibility? Or what is in the tank for you?
I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. I think, the position I'm in now is more on me. I need to figure out what exactly it is I want to do. Because I have fortunately, been blessed to know people that can help me do that now. As far as another presidential campaign, I see myself in government service again. I like it. I like working for you guys. There's nothing that gives me a greater sense of teamwork than what I worked on. I think as far as another presidential campaign, I don't see myself doing that, and I don't think, and it's not even burnout, it's the people I worked with is why I did it. And the president's my guy, and I don't see me being able to do what I did for him for somebody else at this time. Certainly that could change, and if some of the people I worked with, if Dennis or Anita or Alyssa or somebody like that said, hey, do you want to help me? I've got this other candidate, then I'd probably think about it and say yes. Or my advanced guys, Mike or Greg, same thing, because I'd be there for them, and that's why I did it. And so I see myself needing to take a break from that for a while. As far as next thing, I'm looking for private sector jobs only in so much, that is the one thing I haven't done yet, and so I need to see what that is like. But I'm taking my time. I'm enjoying my family and being a dad. I'm trying to do the things I didn't do for 8 years, and it's been good. So.
All right. What are you hopeful for, sort of personally, I guess, but also politically, in the next 4 years?
What am I hopeful for? This is going to sound cliche, but I'm hopeful for you guys. I think what is unique about your generation is you guys are so optimistic, and I'm on the top of the millennial group, but you guys, just even the younger folk in my office, and I'm not that old, but the optimism that you all possess exceeds even mine, and I consider myself a fairly optimistic person, and that makes me feel good. You guys are willing to go out there and do things for other people, and you think that you can solve every problem, which is amazing. And so that gives me hope. What was the other part of your question?
Personally, what are you hopeful for?
What am I hopeful personally? I'm hopeful to get a house, maybe get a fishing boat, and in 4 years, and maybe have a second child. That's kind of my that's my plan.
All right. Well, thank you. On that note, fishing boats and optimistic millennials, we'll wrap that up. Thank you very much for coming and spending the day with us. It's been great. Thanks to everybody here for attending, and thanks for Matt for arranging it. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the wonderful McCarthy Center workers, as usual, Maddie and Peter. That was a great job. Appreciate it. Thanks, Matt.